Welcome to Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. My name is Dov Barron. I'm your host. I want to thank you for joining us here at the show. And if you're new to the show, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please remember to share the show with everybody you know, and we appreciate it if you go to iTunes and review the show. That would be great. If you are a regular, we really appreciate that. Because of you, we are #1 in the Fortune 500 category and always at the top with leadership and business. So thank you very much. All right, my leadership tip for today is to do with decision making. As a leader, I'm sure you're aware that decisions are difficult. And the reason they're difficult is because very often there is the logical, rational way we're supposed to do it. This is what makes sense. And then on the other side, there's that, if you will, gut instinct. When we look at the most successful teams that we go in and work with, we find that invariably there are invisible factors at work. And some of those are like, for instance, gut instinct. If you think about the most successful teams and the most successful leaders inside of your organization, in fact, even think about your own company, and maybe there's been a time when it was doing really well, things were going great. And as much as you'd kind of like to take credit, you actually know it's actually got nothing to do with you. You're not quite sure what it is. That's the invisible factors. In fact, we've found that very often that's as much as 50% of why a team is being successful. You know, back in the 1970s, the scientific community felt like they had a pretty good hold on what made up our universe. And around that same time in the 1970s, the S&P 500 would have told you they had a pretty good handle on what makes up the value of your organization. Here's what's interesting about it is let's fast forward about 40 years to today. And what we know now is that the scientific community will tell us that the very thing they thought made up the universe, which is normal, natural matter, actually only makes up about 4% of the universe. The other 96% is either dark matter or dark energy, things that were previously completely invisible to us. The S&P 500 will tell you now, you can go read it yourself, that the more than 80% of the value that is held on the S&P 500 is in intangible assets, the very things that cannot be seen. So often we make decisions based on what is in front of us, as in it's visual, it's available, it makes sense. But the truth is, it's like the iceberg. It's everything that's below that is actually driving everything that happens. And this is also true when it comes to decisions. Let me give you an example. For about 3 years, my daughter didn't speak to me. Now, that was a pretty difficult time. She had asked me for something that I felt I couldn't say yes to. And I got to tell you that before I came to the decision, and before I told her about the decision, I battled internally, because the logical thing was to say yes. This was my daughter. I love her. I wanted her in my life. I want things to be good between us. But instinctively, at that gut level, I knew I had to say no. The result was that she didn't speak to me for 3 whole years. 3 years. And in that 3 years, I got to tell you that I spent a lot of time and a lot of energy wondering if I'd done the right thing, had I made the right decision. And you, if this decision was yours, you may have made a very different decision. It was just the one I felt I had to make. And I doubted it every single day. And then, talking about invisible factors, an invisible factor came into play that healed our relationship. Something I could never have predicted, and I'm sure you would probably never predict, and that was this. About 3 years after we'd not spoken, because I didn't have her phone number, she'd cut off all contact with me, I get a call. My answering machine says it came about 4 o'clock in the morning. So the next day, I recognize that it's my daughter's voice, but it's kind of garbled and not very clear. So I reach out to my family and say, I know you can't give me her number. I don't expect that, but at least can you let her know that I got her message and that I would like to speak to her? And she can either call me or she can give permission to for me to have her number. About a week later, my daughter calls me again and we get to speak. And she tells me that what changed everything for her, the invisible factor, was of all things that the person you would never in fact expect to change our relationship was Christina Aguilera. That my daughter had been listening to her song called Hurt, in which Christina was blaming her father for everything. And my daughter said that she listened to that song and her hard willpower dissolved. And she called me and asked if we could start our relationship again. That was 3 years of not knowing whether I'd made the right decision or the wrong decision. I just knew that I had to make a decision for me, what was true for me at a gut level. And as leaders, we are constantly faced with this. We're faced with, this is the logical, rational thing to do. This is what makes sense. And then that gut instinct, which is those invisible factors, that 90% below the iceberg, below the surface of the iceberg, that is actually driving everything. And it just as equally drives the results, because, as I said, Christina Aguilera was the invisible factor in the rebonding and the reconnecting of my daughter and I. So when it comes to decision making, yes, you can do out your chart of positives and negatives and look at both sides of those things. But the truth is that as a leader, you know what the answer is. You know what the truth is. It's what is invisible. It's the dark matter of your own knowing. The stuff that makes up 96%, not the 4%, but the 96%. So this is Dov Baron, host of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. I want to thank you for joining me. If you've gotten a lot out of this tip, please feel free to share it with everybody you know and everybody who should care about these kinds of things. And again, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. And again, we appreciate you going to iTunes and leaving your reviews and your comments, because that adds relevance to us and keeps us at the top there. So thank you. Until next time, this is Dov Baron. Stay curious, my friend. Stay curious.